The first specific culture that we're going to talk about for the arts of ancient America are the Olmec. And the Olmec had their foundations, their origins in about 1500 BCE. And we have them lasting till about 500 BCE. Just to kind of give you a timeline, this culture is contemporary with Egypt's New Kingdom, which began about 1539 and lasted until 1075 BCE. It also expands into the Greek period, so the 6th century BCE, and also the Roman period, which remember is about 509 BCE to 395 CE. Now the Olmecs are known as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Basically this means that most elements of Mesoamerican art and culture and architecture can be seen to have had an Olmec origin. So we'll see a lot of things kind of begin with the Olmecs and then develop in other cultures further, and also appear in other cultures in a similar form. The Olmecs are really the first fully developed culture in the Americas that we know about. The origins of this civilization are unknown. Everything we know about the Olmecs we get from either archaeology or Maya legend. The Olmecs are one of the most well-researched but also problematic cultures of the Americas. The earliest Olmecs established major centers along the lowlands of modern Mexican states of Veracruz and Tabasco, which is a swampy region, and they fished and hunted here. The Olmecs constructed religious and political ceremonial centers. They actually had very complex centers. They had running water and they had sanitation. These centers probably housed an elite group of rulers, or maybe like ruler priests. And this elite group was supported by a larger population of farmers who lived in the surrounding villages. So we'd have like this complex, which maybe these tall pyramids, these ceremonial centers, and then around these ceremonial centers we're going to have, the more common people who are doing the farming and things like that to support this ceremonial and political center. The earliest known Olmec ceremonial center is at San Lorenzo, which flourished from about 1200 to 900 BCE. So you can see San Lorenzo here on the map, right here. Another Olmec center that flourished was the center of La Venta, which is located over here on the map. La Venta rose to prominence after the decline of San Lorenzo, and La Venta is dated from about 900 to 400 BCE. It was built on the high grounds between rivers. This is what remains of it today. You can still see the remains of the Great Pyramid, which is an earthen mound right here. It rises about 100 feet and is intended to represent a volcanic mountain. It is mimicking the shape of this volcanic mountain, and it also is trying to kind of capture the power of a volcanic mountain. You can imagine how powerful and supernatural a volcano would seem, and they are trying to sort of capture that essence. So they're trying to capture their natural power. Now, La Venta would have had an entire complex surrounding this pyramid. They would have had a courtyard probably in front of the pyramid and a ball court. La Venta is suspected to be one of the suggested sites that it may have been the place of the original or first ball court, but we can't confirm that at this time. La Venta had a symmetrical arrangement of earth mounds, platforms, and central open spaces, and it was placed along an axis which was probably determined by astronomical observations. The Mesoamericans and other ancient American cultures were very much into observing astronomical events and phenomenons, as were some of the earlier prehistoric cultures that we discussed with Europe. This alignment along astronomical events or observations is a later characteristics of Mesoamerican architecture. So that will actually continue to dominate city planning or ceremonial centered planning. The Olmecs never developed a written language. They do have highly descriptive art, and that kind of gives us an idea or some ideas about their beliefs. Their religion was probably at least in part based on shamanism, and shamanism or shamanistic practices basically is, so shaman is like a priest or sometimes a healer or a holy man. And a shaman is, it's like they're your religious leader of your village or your town or whatever. And they are able to get into like a trance state, sometimes by taking hallucinogens or sometimes just by meditation. They go into this trance state. And when they're in this trance state, they are able to travel through the cosmos. So they are able to deal with supernatural beings. Now, especially in the cases of Mesoamerican cultures and also in North American cultures, shamans usually have, like, for lack of a better word, like a personal spirit animal. For Mesoamerica, they're often jaguars, but also sometimes they can be birds and frogs. These three animals seem very closely related to transformation. And shamans will be accompanied by this animal spirit, and they will travel through the cosmos and interact with the supernatural to kind of improve the life of the people, the lives of the people of the village. And maybe, say somebody's sick, they'll enter the state and try to get supernatural help. This is kind of a very simplistic explanation for it, but I hope kind of you're sort of getting the idea that the shaman's job is to interact with the supernatural on the rest of the villagers' behalf. In addition to having this sort of spirit animal accompany them when they travel through the supernatural, they often will transform into the supernatural. So we will often see images of shamans kind of in this transformation process. Here's an artwork that is a good example of that depiction of shamanism and transformation. So when we look at this image, we can see that it's got a human body. This guy's got a human body. But he has kind of a jaguar face. His face is morphing or transforming into this creature. You can also see his hands. Like this hand looks a little bit more human, where this hand looks more like a paw. So he's in the middle of this transformation between being a human and then becoming like this supernatural animal figure in this image. So this image is a great example of that process of a human changing, or shaman changing into animal form. So shamanism is kind of like the basis of Olmec culture. Like when they first began to develop, they're going to use shamanism. Now they actually will continue to use shamanism throughout their existence, but it will become a little bit more regulated and sophisticated, I guess we should say, as society changes from a hunting-gathering based culture into an agriculturally based culture. We'll see that the sun and the rain will become more important, which means that like they will be a bigger part of their agricultural world. Like most of Mesoamerica, or all of Mesoamerica really, the Olmec are going to rely on maize or corn for their subsistence. That's going to be their big crop. They do grow other crops, so that's their big crop. And so, of course, since they're practicing agriculture, the sun and the rain are going to become very important. And they will really become kind of the main gods, as well as the maize god, as the culture continues to develop. So they will still practice shamanism, but in addition to shamanism, or as part of shamanism, as the Olmecs develop and they have this agriculturally based society, a new class of, for lack of a better word, priests are formed, or religious leaders, I guess we should say. These religious leaders are going to be the ones that are going to motivate people to build these pyramids and they're going to create these rituals that will try to control the supernatural forces, particularly those of the sun and the rain, and of course also control the population as well. The priests will also be working with the rulers, and they will become really interrelated. Like we saw in early Europe, there's not really any separation of church and state. They exist as one. The Olmec are also known as great stone carvers. They produced monumental sculpture, including altars, seated figures, and colossal heads. What we're looking at now is one of those colossal heads. And this is really what they are most famous for. This is the most iconic art pieces of the Olmec. So for these colossal heads, they would use basalt, which is a volcanic stone, and they would have to quarry that from about 50 miles away. They'd also carve images into jade, and jade is rather a hard rock, and this is what it's a beautiful green stone. They would import the jade from Guatemala, which is about 200 miles away. Now remember, they're carving something like this, which again is a pretty hard rock, with no metal tools. So they didn't have any metal to carve these creations. Now basalt is actually a soft rock, so it wouldn't have been quite as difficult. So they would quarry these huge basalt blocks at distant sites, and then they would transport them to La Venta and to other centers. Colossal heads like this one would range in height from about 5 to 12 feet. They would weigh somewhere between 5 to 20 tons or more. We think that they either depicted the portraits of their rulers. Some people think that they were shaman. They could have been both. They could have been a priest, a shaman. They could have been a ruler. What we do know about them is that they are depicting adult males, and they're usually wearing close-fitting caps. One of them wears a helmet. It just kind of depends on which one you're looking at. So they're wearing, most of them are wearing these close-fitting hats that we call skull caps, and they usually have chin straps, and which you can see a chin strap right here, and they usually also wear large earplugs, which are kind of like earrings. They're really interesting pieces. They have rather fleshy faces, delicate almond eyes here. You can looking at, this is the same one, just different angles, so you can see that they were carved on all sides except for not the bottom. This one has what I always thought was a paw print, but actually is decorated with petals. These are actually petals and a U-shaped motif. So they have these fleshy faces, these almond eyes. They have flat, broad noses. They have thick, protruding lips and downturned mouths. There does seem to be a great degree of naturalism and portraiture in the depiction of these images, because they can be quite different. So this one actually does have a jaguar paw on his helmet. And you can see here the chin strap, and here is that ear plug I was telling you about. But they are rather individualized. This guy, clearly not the same guy as this guy. So they do seem to be individualized, and this suggests that they are portraits of a specific person. They could be representing rulers. They could be representing maybe ancestors or ball players. We think probably they represent rulers. We know that the Olmecs were very fascinated with the human head or face, and they believed that it showed the personality or the soul of a person. One of the most important supernatural animals, which we mentioned before, is a jaguar. And here, like I said, we can see it on his hat, or his skull cap. Now, the interesting thing about these colossal heads is that a lot of them have been found mutilated or buried or burned, as if the image is powerful, so it has a power of its own and it must be destroyed or it can damage the living people. In Mesoamerica, there is this idea of animism, which is the idea that everything has an energy or a spirit. Power is a temporary thing, but things like stone sculpture can possess power, and they have to be ritually killed or destroyed so that they cannot be used later. So their power won't be used by other people or contemporary enemies, or maybe just their power won't haunt the living or bother the living. There were 12 heads that were found at San Lorenzo. All of them had been mutilated and buried by about 900 BCE, which was about the time that the site declined. At La Venta, they found 102 basalt monuments. 4 are colossal heads. There is evidence that they were trying to commemorate their rulers and historic events with sculptures like these. They've also found, so like here's just another example. This is one I actually went to La Venta and did